Well, that was sobering.
Pointed at the projector.
Pointed at the projector. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
So,
Yeah.
so this is a presentation I put together because I had heard things, read things, seen things, and I felt that DNA showed a different answer. And so I put together a presentation that would address some of those anti-Semitic concerns. So we may go from one form of anti-Semitism to another form of anti-Semitism, but the basic anti-Semitism we can't avoid. I've been a genealogist since I was a boy, so that takes us back to the mid-60s. About 3 months before my bar mitzvah, my grandmother died. And we went to the cemetery and for the funeral, and after the service, my father took my hand and my mother took my brother's hand, and they walked us through the cemetery. We went and visited their relatives. And I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I had no first cousins, and I had second cousins, a couple that I really didn't know. In other words, I felt isolated. I had one grandmother in Omaha, Nebraska. My mother's father had passed away when she was a little girl, so I never knew that grandfather. And the other grandparents lived in Minneapolis, so we only saw them for, bar mitzvahs and that kind of stuff. But that night, and you can imagine this, when everyone came to my parents' house for the Shiva call, I was the little kid walking around to all the old people, primarily women, saying, only if they had accents, saying, tell me about your family. Where were you from? And so on that day, I drew my first genealogical chart, and this is it from 1965. You can see that there's no pointer here, but you can see that, someone said, oh, I know she died in 1896 and she was 39, so that means that she was born in the 1850s. We just wrote it, they just scribed it on there, and that was it. Just to give you an idea, through the miracle of something called yearbooks.com, one of our customers at Family Tree DNA thought it would be humorous to show everyone what I looked like in 1960. And so now I'm going to fast forward to the 1990s, before the DNA industry had started. There was a study in 1997 that used Leonard Nimoy as a picture. It was a study of the Kohanim. Some of you may have seen that study. I was captivated by that study, and I immediately wrote to the people at the University of Arizona in Tucson who had done the study, saying, I'm not a Kohen, but if you need someone to do a DNA test, I'm your guy. Just contact me. Well, they didn't, of course. So for those of you that aren't familiar, the Live Long and Prosper slogan was something from the set of Star Trek. And in his book, Leonard Nimoy says that when they figured out on the set that they needed a something to represent the Vulcans, he said, I got it. It's this, because he was mesmerized by the chanting of the Kohanim when he was a boy. Now, what are we going to talk about today? Very, very shortly, we're going to talk about what I call anthrogenetics, historians' claims about the origins of the Jews, who are the Jews on a genetic level, and can molecular biology answer previously unanswerable questions. So let's start on that. Just as a very, very brief, this is DNA. You have your chromosomes in the center. We have 22 of them. Those are called the autosomes, and they recombine in every generation when a man and a woman get together and procreate and have a child. Outside of the nucleus of the DNA, you have what's called mitochondria. Mitochondria, in effect, produce energy for our cells, and our cells give the mitochondria food, so it's a good symbiotic relationship.
They are firing. For the military things, they're firing.
Okay.
Oh.
So I'm getting like a,
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
salute. I like that.
Congratulations.
So just real briefly, we have these autosomes, 22 pairs, as I said, right there. We have then the sex determining chromosomes. Everyone has an X. Women have 2. Men have a Y chromosome. You can see how small and demure it is. And ladies, when you think you should pick on us, just remember we have small Y chromosomes. So very briefly, what kind of DNA can you use to interrogate yourself to understand more about your history? We have the Y chromosome, which is passed from a man to his sons. There's no recombination, so there's no fuzzy signal that you get. You just get your Y chromosome. I've got my Y chromosome from my dad, who got it from his dad, who got it from his dad, who got it from his dad. Mitochondria works the same way, passed down from a woman to all of her children. The girls pass it on to the next generation. And then there's the third type of DNA, which is autosomal DNA. That's the 22 chromosomes that we talked about. That's like having, in effect, 2 decks of cards that you shuffle. A red deck, a blue deck, you shuffle it once. That's your first child. You take that same red and blue deck, if you're still with the same guy, ladies, and that's your second child. The children look similar because they come from the 2 same decks, but they don't look identical because when you shuffle, unless you're a croupier in Vegas, it's not red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. It's red, red, blue, 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 red, blue, something like that. And when you shuffle again, it's not identical. So your children may look similar, but they don't look identical. And just as another way of explaining this, my great-great-grandmother, passed her mitochondria on to my grandmother, who passed it on to my mother, who passed it on to my sister and to myself. Whereas on the Y chromosome side, you're looking at the great-grandfather, the grandfather, the father, and the brother. And so when this industry started, when I sold my first DNA test in May 2000, all we had available for the public was the mitochondria, which worked on this side, and the Y chromosome that looked at the male side. And in effect, if a woman was interested in her father's, let's say her father's line, if she didn't have a brother and her father was dead, then in effect she was what we call daughtered out, and she couldn't do that interrogation unless she could find a distant cousin. That's why this autosomal DNA testing that 23andMe pioneered in 2009 became so interesting because, as Brad knows, as we had a t-shirt, I don't have it, I have it on my phone, but what it meant is sex didn't matter anymore. Whereas this was very sexually related in that you had to follow the rules of science. Now, this is called a phylogeny. A phylogeny is a theoretical construct of how evolution has taken place within a species. So if I had a pointer, I don't think there's a pointer on here, I would point out that Homo sapien is, let's say, 100 to 200,000 years old. You have the branch A, as you can see, and then there's a separate branch defined by M42 that would give you branches B, D, and E, and then you have other branches which keep coming down here and breaking off. And there are about 22 branches of the tree. If I know, for example, that someone is Finnish, then I know that the likelihood that they are from haplogroup N is exceptionally high. If I know someone is in haplogroup J, then I know their origins are Middle Eastern. When I say origins, I'm talking about 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. If I know someone is haplogroup branch I of the tree of mankind, then I know that they were early in Europe, and they're predominantly found in southeastern Europe today. I think you'll appreciate this. Sometimes historians or pseudo-historians go wrong or get it wrong for their own selfish interest. I ran across a couple of these guys. Who's heard of Arthur Koestler? Good, okay, you have his book, the one shown here, The 13th Tribe. If you do, the next time that you have a ladder out, put it at the top of your library shelves, because it's inaccurate. It's not accurate. What he tried to do, and Kostler had this claim that Ashkenazi Jews were not descended from Judeans of history, but that Jews were descendants from the Khazars. You've heard of the Khazars? This group of people between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea running all the way up to Kiev. They had an empire. The theory or the statement was that leadership had converted to Judaism. They were very smart. They had Muslims on their south and they had Christians on their north, and they said, well, maybe if we're Jewish, we can be the bridge between the two, rather than understanding that they just made two enemies instead of just having one.
There is a stronger anti-Semitic accusation in Poland than just calling you a Jew. You can be called a Khazarian Jew.
There you go. So, but Kostler was trying to solve the problem. He said that if it could be proved that Jews were descended from the Khazars, then they weren't Semites, and so anti-Semitism would go away. And he believed this. Now, Kostler was of Jewish origin, survived the war, went to England, wrote this book, and it took the world by storm because, unfortunately, too much Jews are news. And so I never met this individual. I never went back and forth with him on the internet. But I did go back and forth with this guy on the internet. His name is Iran El Hayat. I would call him a Ashkenazi. No, I would call him a Mizrahi Sephardi anti-Ashkenazi Israeli Jew. I met him when he was hired by the National Geographic Society to be their population geneticist, even though he had a degree in population genetics in plant genetics. They hired him anyway. He came to the party with a few odd ideas. And what he says is there is no blood or family connection among the Jews. The various groups of Jews in the world today do not share a common genetic origin. Their genome is largely Khazarian. Whatever Israelite blood the Khazar Jews have had is minuscule. So his issue with the Ashkenazi Jews, I think, went back not to the fact that they were Ashkenazi, but to the fact that originally the Ashkenazi Jews were more of an intelligentsia moving from educated Europe, and non-Ashkenazi Jews had lived either under the Arabs. Well, they had lived under the Arabs somewhere, whether they were Sephardic Jews who had moved to Morocco or Greece or Turkey, especially Turkey would be a Muslim country. But whatever it was, he was just very interested in proving the kind of Khazarian stuff. And he got picked up by a guy named Texmar, who Texmar has passed away, but Texmar was either from, I think he was from Austin. He was a conspiracy theorist and an anti-Semite. And what I told Iran El Hayat is when anti-Semites are quoting your book, you probably didn't do such a good job in your research. He didn't think that was particularly funny, but I wasn't interested in creating a fun relationship with him. I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone with him. So did a guy named Spencer Wells, who was the director of the National Geographic Genographic DNA testing project. And none of us were able to convince him, because when your mind is like a steel trap rusted shut, I can't teach you anything. You won't listen to anything. There's no reason that you come to a lecture, you just know it all. And that was kind of where he is. Now, the fact that this Khazarian thing has been used to try to delegitimize Ashkenazim to me, it's a real serious issue, because it leads to the legitimacy of the state of Israel. You probably all, as Americans, have heard of BDS, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement. I contend that it's not BDS, it's BDDS, it's boycott, divest, delegitimize, and sanction. And the delegitimization of the Jewish people and our origins to the land of Israel, in my opinion, is just another clever form of late 20th century anti-Semitism. And my concern is that all that talk, and quite frankly, quite often those lies, lead to this. And this is what I'm concerned about. Because this questions your right to exist as Jews free anywhere in the world. And you can see that this is a rally. I took this off the internet. This was a Paris anti-Semitic protest, let's put it that way. But we're going to move away from those guys. We're going to talk about another Israeli historian. Has anyone heard of a man named Shlomo Sanz? Yeah? Okay. So Shlomo's one of my best because he's given me so much material to talk about. He had his MA in French history. His PhD was in Marxism. He was born in Poland, I believe, in a DP camp after the war. His parents moved to Israel either in the late, probably in the late 40s. He left Tel Aviv, well, he left Israel in the 60s and moved to Europe. He eventually went back to Israel because, as he's quoted as saying, the coffee scene on Dizengoff was the best in the world. And that's what he came up with as his explanation for why he left France and came back to Israel. So the question is, if I give a pass to Kostler, and I just consider Iran El Hayat to have been dropped on his head when he was a baby, and I know that Tex Mar is an anti-Semite, and there's no way that you can convince a typical anti-Semite that Jews are anything other than nefarious, then how am I going to classify this gentleman? Is he ignorant, or the stuff that he says, is it malicious? Well, I'll just share with you two of his books, The Invention of the Jewish People and The Invention of the Land of Israel. He wrote a third book. By the way, these things have become, unfortunately, big sellers, and they've been translated into dozens of languages. I think only the Bible has been translated into more languages than these books. So this is what I took from his website in, well, I don't know when, 2009. Here's what he said: there's no racial or ethnic basis for being Jewish any more than there is for being Christian or Arab. And the great majority of those who consider themselves Jews are descended from converts from Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and North Africa, not from ancient Hebrews, mythically expelled from the Holy Land by the Romans, and hence are in no sense ethnic Semites of Near East origin or ethnic anything else. And I saw this on his website, and I said, wow. You know, like, wow. You know, can I, in any way, shape, or form, answer this? Wow. Because if you don't answer a lie, then the lie becomes the commonly accepted truth. Of course. And so it's I felt a responsibility to try to come up with some answers to this individual. 5 APAC policy conferences. The reason I spoke there is because they wanted me to speak on the subject of BDDS. They wanted me to highlight or to shine a light on this, delegitimization of the Jewish people in an attempt to delegitimize any right or any rights that Jews may have to a land that was for 1900 years called Palestine.
Wow.
So that first one, there's no racial or ethnic basis. You can read what it says. By this, it's pretty obvious that Sands is rejecting any historical connection and the potential genetic overlap between Jews of different countries, which is what we have been taught our whole lives is not the case. We've been taught that that a Jew from one country and a Jew from another country, the only difference is that they live in other countries, but their origins were the same. So that brings me to the first individual, a guy named Javier Caldes. Javier was born in a place called Mallorca. You've heard of it? You heard of the Chuetas? Anyone heard of the Chuetas? The Chuetas were Jews who were forcibly converted to Catholicism in the 1450s in Mallorca, and to show their Catholic neighbors how they had truly converted, okay, they stood in the doorposts of their house gnawing on pork ribs, therefore chueta, which means rib. They did that to demonstrate that they were just as Catholic as their other neighbors, although for 500 years, Chuetas were not allowed to marry Mallorcan Catholics. So they were no longer Jewish, they became Catholic, okay? And they ate their pork ribs, but no one would marry them. So the only people that would marry them were other Chuetas. So they kind of remained Jewish genetically, even though you heard the craziness that's happening. So I wrote to Javier. We had some nice exchanges. Essentially, you can feel in his emails that he's yearning for a Jewish past. I mean, for his Jewish past to come, to the present. He even makes the point that he says, I see all this heritage as a responsibility to do something to go back to my roots. I'm not married yet, and really it would be great to have a Jewish wife. In that way, Judaism would be important again in my family, and my kids would be Jewish, all back to the way it was 20 generations ago. And then he says that he talks about this, that there's a lot of endogamy, the people in his community don't marry from people outside of his community. And he says to me, if you look at my mtDNA, my female matches, it looks like a shul directory, which I was very much taken with. And by the way, there's a movie, there's a historian who has done a story on the Chuetas. And I know that the day after we come home, there's an airing of it that I've signed up for on the internet. Now, haplogroup, branch of the tree of mankind, ROA2 is Middle Eastern. Okay, so it's not a European branch, it's a typical Middle Eastern branch. And so we look through the names. You have this Rebecca Douglas, which is undoubtedly a changed name, Mr. Polantansky, Mr. Shore, Julian Shepard, this Susan Pierce, Leonard Schlussel, who's a fourth cousin of mine, and Samuel Gelfand.
Those are Javier's
They're all
matches.
Ashkenazi Jews.
Those are Javier's matches?
Yeah, they're his exact matches. And when they're exact matches, I'm saying they're using the full mitochondria sequence. So that mitochondria molecule is really small. It's about 16,000 base pairs. So we run the entire molecule, and it gives you a really good sense of who you're related to and who you're not related to. This is where Javier's matches are from. So you can see there are a couple. There's one in Mexico City. That guy was likely, I'm sure if we dug into it, we would find that he's Catholic today, living in Mexico, that his family had somehow gotten to Spain and then ultimately moved on to the New World. At the same time, you have this mass of people that he matches in Eastern Europe, which would give one the idea that all those relatives that I just mentioned of his and he came from the Middle East. They may have split. Some may have become Eastern European. Some may have become Spanish Jews. It's an accident of where you happen to go and how many centuries you lived there. But the point is that the origin of that DNA is in the Middle East, and you can see how it spread. Doesn't look real good for Dr. Sands yet, but we should give more opportunities. So here's another one. I call it One Hispanic's Discovery. This guy gets his list of matches and calls the company one day and tells me, what is this thing, he asked, what is this thing Ashkenazi? So, I mean, we were at a very, very basic level in the conversation. But he was very happy that he did have one guy who was from Bulgaria who said he was Sephardic, because he kind of understood that because he was Spanish, and once I explained that Sephardic means Jew of Spanish origins, he kind of accepted the fact that, well, at least he was of Spanish origin, so, you know, not everything was wrong. I ultimately told him that I had been waiting for his phone call. And he said, why? And I said, because you're a match to me. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but again, here's another example of a Spanish Jew on his father's side now. Okay, this is Javier, it's
Guillermo.
It's Guillermo, thank you. So Guillermo had these matches to the Echeverrias and the Rabinowitzes and the Mamarios and the Tenorios, but also to Greenspans and to Pensons and Paulsons and Katzenellenbogens and Harolds, okay, for example. So, and the great majority of those who consider themselves Jews are descended from converts from Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and North Africa. That's what Shlomo said. So, time for us to go back to the DNA and see if maybe if DNA can potentially answer these questions, which means we're going to talk about who are the Jews on a genetic level, and can molecular biology now answer a previously unanswerable question. So here we are back to the phylogeny. What I've done is I've shown you which of the branches of the tree we find Jewish populations in. So E is North African typically, G is the Caucasus, I is Southeastern Europe, the Fertile Crescent is J, Central Asia, which Dr. Sands talked about, is Q, R is found in Turkey, Kurdistan, and all of Europe, a couple of different branches of it, and then T is found in Lebanon and the Fertile Crescent. So what I said is, if I can take all the Sephardic Jews who have tested with us, remove everybody that has a name twice. So I would kind of reduce the list down to individual lineages rather than families, which could, if the entire family tested, could skew the records. So I went ahead and did that, and I said the Sephardic population, no one's arguing that the Sephards aren't Jews. They're arguing that Ashkenazis are not really Jews, and certainly not Semites. But no one had that argument for the Sephardic Jews, so I created a phylogeny of the people in the family tree DNA database in 2009, and this is what it looks like. 48% of Sephardic Jews are J. J is from the Middle East. 13% are from this E1B group, which is kind of a North African group, of which Brad is right? You two guys are members of that group. This G group is found from the Caucasus, kind of high at 16%. This R group is found at 18%, and then you've got these little bit players where you've got the this I haplogroup, then you've got two others, a T haplogroup, and the other one must be Q from Central Asia. So I would refer to these guys as bit players, and I would consider these others to be primarily what Sephardic Jews look like. Now, if we Ashkenazi Jews are the descendants of Khazars from Eastern Europe, then we're going to have an overlap with them. And if we don't have a lot of overlap with them, we're going to have to assume that the Ashkenazi Jews have a different origin.
Well,
So,
what does the R stand for?
these are all branches of the tree.
Yeah.
It's found all the way from northern Syria through Turkey and then all of Europe. For example, to give you an idea, Germany is about 70% R broken down to a couple different subgroups. Okay. Ireland is 90% R, for example. So that's what the Ashkenazi Jewish community looks like.
In other words, the same.
The same.
Right. You see that difference? I mean, it's like
So small.
So small. In fact, here, let me show you. Let me add in our cousins. Who are our cousins?
Muslims.
Thank you.
Muslims.
So I'll add in all three. So there's the Sephardic Jews, there's the Ashkenazi Jews, and these are all Middle Eastern Muslims. I took out the Middle Eastern Christians when I received this from Dr. Michael Hammer, who's the professor at the University of Arizona, who did the wet work, who did the laboratory work on the Kohanim study from 1998. So those are the three groups, and to give you what an outlier looks like, I'll let you get that one real quick if you're going to take a picture of it. Now I'm going to show you what Ukraine looks like.
Wow.
Ukraine being, do you see some differences?
Khazari land.
Yeah, right. So this is where the Khazars came from.
Can you go back?
This is a Middle Eastern population of Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Middle Easterners. Okay, they are essentially similar. The reason that there are all these bit players here is because the Indian Ocean kind of became like a Muslim lake. And you had anywhere there was a Muslim, they could come anywhere in the Muslim world very easily. And so you've got some groups that have come over and are found in the Middle Eastern Muslim population in small percentages. They're basically southeastern
South
Asian.
Asian. Yeah, South Asian.
Southern and southeastern Asia. And you've had a little bit of people moving, gene flow happens. But essentially, those three populations are similar in almost every case. The differences are, what we call founder effect or population drift. I will admit to Dr. Sands that Sephardic at 1% and Sephardic at 4% is huge. Okay, it's 4 times. It's not insignificant. 1648 is the likely answer as to why. Because rape happens. The Chalnikian crew didn't just kill Jews, but they raped some. We always know who the mother is. In Judaism, the religion follows the line of the mother for, I believe, exactly this reason, because when you're a people and you don't have a land, you get dumped on. So there's that. And to put icing on the cake of this genetic question for Dr. Sands, I tested just randomly, going out with friends in Houston, Texas. I tested what I call the 2 Steves. Steve Finkelman, whose family is from Poland and knows no other home for hundreds of years other than Poland. And then I have a friend named Steve Seka. Steve Seka says, are you kidding? We've been in Syria forever. And not only are we Syrian, but we're Halabis. We're not from Damascus, we're from Aleppo.
And they're Muslim.
And they're Jewish.
They're Jewish. Syrian
Jewish.
Syrian Jews.
So you've got Syrian Jews and you've got Polish Jews. And I did a DNA test on them because it showed, on the basic test, it showed they had some similarity. And when you go out to dinner with these guys, they say, well, I took your test, but I don't really take it seriously because, I matched Finkelman and he's a Polak. And wait a minute, Steve, you're some Syrian Jew, and I don't think that's fair. No, come on, he's so far away from me, we have nothing in common. So when we brought out a test about 4 years ago that sequenced the entire Y chromosome, every base, A, C, G, A, T, 25 billion base pairs long. I did a DNA test on the 2 of them because I wanted to understand why they showed up on the same match pages. What?
It's not coming up.
It's not coming. Here, hold on, let's do that. So, there you go. These 2 guys, you can see the phylogeny here. This is one guy up there. And you can see his common ancestor, not that tall. And then you can see the other guy down here. This is Steve from Poland. This is Steve from Syria. I show you the 2 pictures of the 2 individuals. These guys have now been proven as cousins approximately 60 generations ago. In other words, their common ancestor is about 400 CE. This predates the concept of Ashkenazi and Sephardic. These guys are descended from the same man. I will tell you just quickly that my son married a girl a year and a half ago and 2 years ago, and my son thought it would be a brilliant idea to do a DNA test on his father-in-law. Okay, his father-in-law and I share a common male ancestor in about 150 CE. About 1900 years ago, we both descend from the same man. Now, that's much further away than kissing cousins. I mean, this is a long, long way away, and knowing the endogamy in Jewish populations in Central Europe, I would say that we are much closer related on other lineages rather than just the Y chromosome, but I thought that was pretty interesting. So, here's the question. Who are we? Okay, well, there are Muslim Arabs. By the way, this is the most controversial thing I'll say today. There are Muslim Arabs. There are Christian Arabs. And my contention is that there are Jewish Arabs. And that's us. We came from the Middle East. That's all being an Arab means, is you came from Arabia. Okay? And Israelis, whenever I say this and I have any Israelis, and everyone walks out and leaves and a couple people clap and the Israelis are here in my face because they're offended by the term, but that's their own bias. Okay, this is a neutral thing I'm talking about because I've shown you that the cauldron with the cholent in it, whether you scoop it up and say Ashkenazi, Sephardic, or Mizrahi, or Arab, it's all the same soup. It's not the same soup as what the ladle would get if you were looking at the Ukrainians. But the people in the Middle East, it's all very, very similar. Even similar percentages. So, now, is it time to ask the ultimate political question? If we know that as Jews, okay, we are Jewish Arabs, is it time for Israel to make its application to join the Arab League? And I want you to know that when that day comes, I will be ready. And so, not from ancient Hebrews, mythically expelled from the Holy Land by the Romans, and hence those Jews are in no sense ethnic Semites of Near Eastern origin or ethnic anything else. So finally we have an opportunity to find some real historical evidence, unless perhaps you believe that this was produced in a fake antique shop.
Do you be clear what you're tell them what you're showing.
It's next. Okay, this is the Arch of Titus. Who's been to Rome? Have you seen the Arch of Titus? If you ever want to hear Hebrew in Rome, go to the Arch of Titus, because there's always Israelis under the Arch of Titus. Look at this. Says this inscription records the dedication of the arch by the Senate and the people of Rome to the emperor after his victory over Judea in 70 of the Common Era. And I don't know what more Professor Sands, would want. Here's evidence historically, here's evidence genetically, and so genetic genealogy is guilt by association. Matching someone means that you have a shared heritage. Even if you have no idea what your heritage is, you can learn about your genealogy, recent, we call that, recent ancestry, genealogy. You also can look at your deeper ancestry, which we call anthropology. However, if you really don't want to know the answer to the question, don't ask the question. And we had a doctor once who called us, and he had a problem with getting a successful scrape. And then we had a cartoonist who called us once who said, I really like the idea of doing getting a DNA test, but I don't want to pay for it, but I'll draw for it. So he said, tell us your best story. And I said, it's very easy. The best story is the doctor who called up and who said, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I scraped both times, and your company tells me they didn't get any DNA. And we said, well, all you have to do is open your mouth, doctor, and scrape your cheek. And he said, So he said, okay, so am I supposed to scrape the outside of the inside of my cheek or the inside of the outside of my cheek? I said, look, just open your mouth. The cartoonist says, don't go any further. I have the cartoon for you. And it's the picture of the doctor on the phone with family tree DNA, and he's got his scraper in the absolutely wrong place. And then, really, my second favorite one, which is from 1997. This is before the industry started. The woman who's saying it doesn't look, you don't look anything like the skinny kid I married 25 years ago. I need a DNA test to
Make sure
prove that
it's
it's you. And my last opportunity to make you smile or laugh before we let you out of here tonight is something that shows, in my opinion, how ubiquitous DNA testing has become. I don't agree with what this guy on the next slide is doing, but a customer from Sarasota, Florida, sent me this about 10 years ago, and he said, Bennett, I think you'll really appreciate this. And it's a picture of the man holding a sign, a cardboard sign, like this, and the sign says, need money for DNA test, girlfriend might be sister. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Very good.